Welcome to Cover. I'm Stephen Walker. Today we're inside the pages of The Advocate. We're talking all things men's health with Dr. Carlton. But first I talked with Christopher Wiggins, who wrote How They Freed Brittney. Hello Christopher, thank you for joining me. So reading your article gave me anxiety. What were your first thoughts when you heard that Brittany Greiner was arrested?
You know, when Brittany Greiner was first arrested last year in February, it gave me pause because we learned about her arrest right around the time that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. And so in that moment, it made me think that, it wouldn't be it's never a good time to be detained in Russia. But in the context of that war having just started, it certainly wasn't a good time to be an American gay person, black gay person detained in Russia. So, in that moment, I really felt like of the people who stood out like a sore thumb, she would be one, and being in her situation would be no good.
It's so scary. Do you think this was planned by the Russians to make an example of an LGBTQ plus person of color? Or do you reckon that the prison swap was always on the Russians' mind?
It's really hard to get into the head of someone as crazy as Vladimir Putin. But when speaking to people for the piece that I wrote, who are knowledgeable on the subject, they believe that there was strategy behind picking her as someone who represented a lot of the flashpoints that might touch on American society now. So, she's a black person, she's an LGBTQ person, and opportune was that she was an American traveling to Russia at that time. So, while no one can say for sure that this was something that the Russians planned, it's not something that people would not put past them.
Yeah, and as facts are coming to light about the case and the courtroom, so apparently she was in a cage in the courtroom, unable to stand. Was this true?
Yeah, so she's like almost 7 feet tall, right? And so when they were leading her around, they had her shackled and put her in what was can only be described as a holding cage. It was a little mesh enclosure within the courtroom. In Russian courts, that is where the defendant is placed, the accused person is placed. It's kind of in a way to humiliate them already from the get go. But since she's so tall and most people are not, that enclosure didn't wasn't tall enough for her to stand, and so she basically had to slump in it entirely until the American government was able to voice their concern and have that change.
Sounds very inhumane. And there was a time when no one even knew where Brittany was. And why was that?
Yeah, so there was a time between when she was transferred from the holding prison to the penal colony where she was to serve her hard labor, about 10 years of that. Uh, right before she was transferred, she disappeared off basically the face of the earth. And that is something that is by design in the Russian system. When someone who is transferred, who has been convicted of a crime, is transferred to one of the penal colonies, they are transferred generally via train car, and it's made as opaque as possible. The destination is unknown to the prisoner, it's unknown to their family, it's even unknown to their attorneys, whereas it was in this case. In fact, when it came to Brittany Greiner, or BG as everyone likes to call her, the her location wasn't even known to the U.S. government for that amount of time. They basically lost track, complete track of her.
Oh, her poor family. Who was integral to the getting BG released?
Well, so Sheila Jackson Lee, the congresswoman from Texas, was really a big proponent of making sure that Brittany Griner's story wasn't left off of the front pages. She and I spoke, and she was very adamant in speaking up about Brittany Griner having been taken behind what she said was still an iron curtain in Russia, and that no one controls Russia other than Putin, and that this is something that, in her opinion, was certainly planned. Then also, Roger Carstens, who is the U.S. presidential special envoy for hostage negotiations and affairs, he is someone whose team has been integral in getting Brittany released and also working on other prisoner releases for people who have been wrongfully detained. The Levinson Act is a law that came to be in 2020, which actually made it possible for people who were detained in other countries to be categorized in such a way that they received a full of government response when they were determined to be wrongfully detained. And so that process was ongoing. And so a whole of government response really was able to make this happen.
Be sure to read the full article in The Advocate. Now to my sit down with Dr. Carlton. Joining me now is Dr. Carlton Thomas. Thank you for being here with me today. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most important thing you need to know about your sexual health?
Well, I think your sexual health, there's really three important prongs you need to know about. Number one is your HIV status. If you're positive, get treated undetectable, you can live a normal, healthy life. And also, once you're undetectable, you can't transmit the virus to others through sex. Second, if you're HIV negative, get on PrEP if you have risk factors to get HIV. Next, obviously condoms are the safest way to play to prevent STIs and other infections. But a lot of people aren't using them as much anymore. So get your STI testing and get checked where you play. It's important to get your STI checks where you play. Not only blood tests for HIV and syphilis and hepatitis C, but also your urine test for gonorrhea and for chlamydia. The blood test also is for syphilis, but there are common infections in the throat and the rectum from chlamydia and gonorrhea that aren't caught unless you swab in those areas. So if you perform oral sex, make sure you get your throat swabbed. If you have anal sex, make sure that you get your butt swabbed to look for gonorrhea and chlamydia at your STI checks. And then obviously vaccinations are important.
Yeah, so we're talking prevention here. So what vaccines do you recommend for men that have sex with men?
Hepatitis A and B are key. They are both viruses that affect the liver. Hepatitis B is more serious. It is a bloodborne virus that can lead to liver cancer and cirrhosis. Hepatitis A usually just makes you pretty sick for about 2 to 3 weeks, but it can be received from rimming. So hepatitis A and B vaccines are important. HPV prevents, that vaccine prevents anal cancer, oral cancer, cervical cancer. And then the meningitis vaccine is very important. There was a big outbreak last year in Florida, especially among HIV positive men. But I recommend all men to get the meningitis vaccine because of the way we congregate in close quarters. And then finally, obviously, the monkeypox vaccine. It's important to get both injections to get maximum protection from monkeypox.
And so what's happening with monkeypox now? Is it still around? Do we still need to be careful?
Well, thankfully, it is massively on the decline. We started with 612 infections a day back in August. We're down to, that was our peak, and we're down to 2 infections a day nationwide right now. So dramatic drop off, thanks to people getting vaccinated, making behavioral changes temporarily until they could get vaccinated. But again, it's not quite completely out. It's almost out. But if everybody gets that second shot, we'll be in better shape.
All right. Go get your second shot, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Carlton. Educational as always, and I hope to chat with you again soon. Thanks for watching Cover to Cover. I'm Stephen Walker. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit theadvocatechannel.com for the latest news.